He was just a single dad on a quiet back road in the middle of winter until he saw her. A soldier, exhausted, frozen, clutching the hands of two little girls in torn boots. He pulled over, and in that moment, a choice was made that would change all 5 lives, forever. Before we begin this true-to-the-heart story of resilience, love, and a miracle born from kindness, if you believe in second chances, in quiet strength, and in the power of doing the right thing when no one's watching, we invite you to subscribe. Your support helps us share more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that hope can arrive on the coldest of days. Now let's begin. The snow had been falling for hours. It blanketed the quiet highway like a secret being kept soft and endless. Jack Monroe tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his aging pickup truck, its heater wheezing against the bitter Wyoming cold. He squinted through the windshield as flakes danced in the high beams, obscuring the world into whiteness. It was just past 9 p.m. on a Wednesday in December. Most folks in Willow Creek were home by now, curled up by fireplaces, sipping hot cider, watching the evening news. But Jack had pulled a double shift at the repair shop as usual. He didn't mind the silence. Silence didn't ask questions. Silence didn't expect answers. As the road curved past the outskirts of town, something caught his eye. A shape, no 3 shapes, moving along the snowy shoulder. Jack eased his foot off the gas. His heart clenched before his mind could catch up. A woman. In uniform. She was hunched forward, cradling a child and one arm gripping the hand of another. The wind tugged at the frayed hem of her army jacket. The girls, maybe 5 or 6 years old, were bundled in mismatched winter coats, one with a hat too large, the other with shoes too thin. Jack's truck rolled to a stop beside them. The woman didn't turn immediately. She pulled both girls closer like a reflex. Jack rolled down the window, halfway bracing against the sudden chill. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm, steady. "You shouldn't be out here. It's below freezing." The woman looked up. Her face was young, but the eyes had seen too much. They flicked to the license plate, the man behind the wheel, then back to the road. "We're fine," she said. Jack glanced at the children, one of them shivering so hard her teeth chattered audibly. "You're not fine," he replied gently. "I'm not a threat. My name's Jack. Jack Monroe. I live just up the road. I've got heat soup and a spare couch." She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the little girl's mittened hand. "You're a soldier," he said, nodding toward her jacket. "And a mother. That's reason enough for me to care." "I'm not their mother," she said quietly. "They're my nieces." He saw the truth land in his chest with more weight than he expected. "They've had a long day," she added, softer now. Jack stepped out into the snow, leaving the engine running. Slowly, without sudden movements, he unzipped his coat and crouched down to the girl's level. "You two want some hot chocolate?" he asked. With those tiny marshmallows, the twin girls looked up at their aunt. One of them nodded tentatively. The woman swallowed hard, then nodded too. The warmth hit them the second they stepped inside his small but cozy house. The old wood-burning stove crackled in the corner. A handmade quilt rested on the couch. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and grease remnants of Jack's last attempt at French toast. Jack handed the woman a towel. She shook her head. "Dry them first," she said. Her voice was firm but not unkind. He crouched again, gently drying the twins' soaked sleeves and untangling their scarves. They let him. That alone told him everything he needed to know about her character. When they were settled with mugs of cocoa and blankets, he turned to her. "You have a name." She hesitated. "Sierra," she said finally. "Sierra Maddox. Nice to meet you, Sierra Maddox. Can I offer you something stronger than cocoa?" She cracked the barest smile. "You got bourbon. I got instant coffee and 2 aspirins. That'll do." They sat at the kitchen table while the girls dozed on the couch. Jack studied her out of the corner of his eye. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the mug. Not from the cold, this was something deeper. "You stationed nearby?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just discharged. Temporarily. Knee injury. I'm between things." "Where were you headed?" "Nowhere, really. I thought maybe Idaho. I heard there's work. You walk into Idaho wasn't the plan." Jack nodded. He didn't pry. The silence settled again, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. There was something about Sierra, something unspoken, frayed at the edges, but solid at the core. He noticed her backpack leaning against the wall near the door. It was military issue, worn, patched with tape. A faded photo peeked out of the side pocket, just the edge charred and curled. He didn't mention it. Not yet. Around midnight, he laid out fresh linens on the pull-out bed in the living room. The girls had already burrowed beneath the quilt like kittens. Sierra stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I don't want to impose," she said. "You're not. The snow's not letting up anytime soon. You're staying." She hesitated. "Do you always pick up strangers off the road?" "No, but I don't think you're a stranger." Sierra met his eyes for a moment, and for the first time her guard dropped a little. "I appreciate it," she whispered. Jack paused, then added, "We all need someone, Sierra, even when we think we don't." He turned off the light. As he lay awake in his own room staring at the ceiling, fan rotating slow above him, Jack's mind churned with unspoken questions. Who was she really? What had brought her to this point? And why did he feel so suddenly that his life had just shifted? Out there in the snow, she had been a silhouette. And here, she was something else entirely. Not just a soldier. Maybe a beginning. The morning came quietly, wrapped in gray light, and the hush that only a blanket of fresh snow could bring. Jack stirred awake to the soft creak of floorboards. For a moment, he forgot there were strangers under his roof. Then the memories rushed back. 2 little girls with sleepy eyes, a young woman with a soldier's spine, and a haunted stillness in her voice. He threw on a sweatshirt and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The smell of coffee hadn't reached the air yet, but something else had something unfamiliar, comforting. A low, steady humming. Not the heater. Not the wind. He followed the sound and found Sierra in the living room, crouched beside the fireplace, her hand steady as she fed logs into the flame. Her hair was pulled back in a rough braid, the kind soldiers made out of habit. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled to her elbows, revealing faint scars on her forearms, not recent, not hidden, but not flaunted either. The girls were still asleep, curled close together like kittens under the quilt. Jack leaned against the doorframe. "You found the firewood," he said. Sierra looked up, her expression unreadable. "Didn't want the kids to wake up cold." "You didn't have to." "I know." There was no defensiveness in her tone, just a simple statement of fact. She returned her gaze to the flames. Jack stepped inside and sat on the arm of a worn recliner watching her. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "A little." "Bad knee." Sierra hesitated, then nodded. "Rain and cold don't help. Got hit with shrapnel 2 years ago outside Raqqa." Jack blinked. The matter-of-fact way she said it, like she was describing a grocery run gone wrong. "Still have metal in there." "Some. Mostly just stubbornness now." He smiled faintly. "Guess that's what keeps people going." Sierra shrugged, but her eyes flickered. "Stubbornness is how I ended up walking through a snowstorm with 2 kids and no plan." Jack didn't respond. There was a heaviness in her voice that didn't ask for pity, only space. Later that morning, he made pancakes. Bad ones. Burnt on the edges, uneven in size, and slightly undercooked in the middle. But when Ellie and Lila sat at the table and took their first bites, their faces lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Best pancakes ever," Lila said through a mouthful of syrup. Jack laughed. You say that now. Wait till your aunt cooks. Sierra raised a brow. I don't cook. You're military. Isn't survival cooking part of the deal? Sure, if you like everything freeze-dried and shaped like bricks. Jack smirked. We might be a good match then. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Sierra looked at him sharply, not offended, just surprised. He looked away, pretending to refill the coffee pot. That afternoon, Toby came home from school. He was a quiet boy, soft-spoken, slow to warm up to anyone. At 8 years old, he had seen more withdrawal than welcome in the past 2 years. But when he spotted Ellie and Lila coloring by the front window, his eyes lit up in the kind of way Jack hadn't seen in months. The girls looked up. Who's that? Jack nudged Toby forward. This is my son. Toby, meet Ellie and Lila. They're staying with us for a while. Toby didn't say much, just nodded and sat cross-legged beside them, picking up a red crayon. The three fell into easy, wordless companionship. Sierra watched from the kitchen, arms crossed, unreadable. Your boy's good with them, she said. He's good. Period. Just doesn't show it to everyone. She nodded. Kids are like that. They feel more than they say. Jack glanced at her. You seem to know a lot about kids. Sierra looked down at her coffee mug. I helped raise my sister's girls. Their dad left when Lila was still in diapers. I stepped in when my sister got sick. Deployed twice between treatments. Came home for the funeral. Been trying to keep a promise ever since. Jack didn't say anything. He just stood beside her quietly, letting the story settle in the air between them. That evening after dinner, Sierra sat by the fireplace with the twins asleep beside her. Toby had gone to bed. Jack lingered in the shadows of the hallway, watching the flicker of flame reflect off Sierra's face. She stared into the hearth, like it held answers to questions she hadn't dared to ask aloud. Then she reached for her backpack. Slowly, carefully, she unzipped the front compartment and pulled out a bundle, letters bound by a fraying ribbon. Her fingers brushed over them with a reverence Jack recognized instinctively. He took a step forward. What are those? She startled but didn't hide them. Letters, she said quietly. From Mason. Jack's heart stopped. Mason. His brother. The room seemed to shrink. The fire crackled louder. Jack walked over slowly, barely breathing. You knew him. His voice broke without warning. Sierra nodded. He was my sergeant in Syria. I served under him until the day until we lost him. She looked up at Jack. Before he died, he gave me these. He told me to find you. Said you'd understand. She held the bundle out with both hands like an offering. Jack stared at them, unable to move. I've been carrying them for 2 years, Sierra whispered. I thought I'd find you sooner. Then I did. And I didn't know how to tell you. Jack sank to his knees before the hearth. His hands trembled as he took the letters. One by one, the names and dates came into focus. Faded ink, dog-eared corners creased from time and weather. The first letter was addressed simply Jack. If you're reading this, I didn't make it home. But I hope you're still standing, still being you. And if there's a boy with your eyes, give him a good life, the one we never had. Jack lowered his head. Tears hit the paper, darkening the ink. Sierra didn't speak. She just sat beside him, her presence quiet, unwavering. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, Jack didn't feel alone. Jack had never been one to believe in fate. But that night, kneeling by the fire with Mason's letters pressed against his chest, something shifted inside him. Not loud or sudden, just a quiet realignment, like the slow turning of a compass that had been spinning too long without direction. The next morning brought a kind of stillness to the house that felt both fragile and unfamiliar. Sierra stood at the sink in his cramped kitchen, rinsing cereal bowls, while Ellie and Lila played with Toby on the living room floor. Jack leaned against the doorway, watching as her movements unfolded with practiced precision, clean, efficient, minimal fuss. She moved like someone used to control, used to rules, used to everything except rest. "You don't have to do that," Jack said, stepping into the kitchen. "I know," Sierra replied without looking up. "You know you're allowed to let someone help you, right?" She finally glanced over her shoulder. "You already did. You let us in." Jack held her gaze for a moment, then pulled open a cabinet. "How are you with eggs? I'm better with MREs." He chuckled. "So am I, honestly. I was raised by a dad who thought cooking meant adding ketchup. Luxury," she deadpanned. "We had mustard." It caught him off guard, and he laughed, a deep, genuine laugh he hadn't heard from himself in a while. Sierra smirked and handed him a clean pan. They worked side by side, her scrambling eggs, him burning toast. The kids' laughter filtered in from the other room like sunlight through a dusty window. It softened the edges of everything. Later that morning, Sierra sat on the porch with a cup of weak coffee staring out across the snow-covered yard. Jack joined her, handing her a thicker pair of socks he'd dug out from a storage box. "These belong to Mason," he said, sitting beside her. Figured he wouldn't mind. She accepted them silently, her thumb brushing across the worn wool. "Tell me about him," she said. Jack nodded slowly. "He was wild when we were kids, always climbing something. Got stuck in a tree once and tried to convince me it was for tactical advantage." Sierra smiled faintly. "He enlisted the second he turned 18. Said he didn't want to end up like our dad. Wanted to serve. Wanted more. He got more," Sierra said softly. Jack turned to her. "He mentioned you in one of the letters. Called you the best shot and worst poker player in the unit." Sierra blinked, caught off guard. "He said that?" "Yeah. He also said if I ever met you, I'd know. Know at that you'd never ask for anything. But you'd give everything." Sierra looked away. Her jaw tightened like she was fighting back something she didn't want him to see. Jack didn't push. He just sat there, letting the silence stretch between them like a thread too sacred to pull. That afternoon, the kids made a fort out of couch cushions and old quilts. Jack watched them from the hallway, arms folded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You okay, Sierra?" asked, approaching quietly. He nodded. "Better than I should be." "They seem happy. They haven't had a reason not to be lately." Sierra glanced at him. "That's because of you." Jack shook his head. "They're resilient. They've adapted to this world better than I ever did." "You gave them something safe," she said. "That's more than most." He turned to her, his expression softening. "You talk like someone who hasn't done the same." Sierra didn't reply. Instead, she sat on the floor near the fort, resting her back against the wall. Jack joined her. The hardwood was cold, but the nearness was warm. "Toby was different after Mason died," Jack said quietly. "He stopped talking much. Didn't want to play. Drew a lot of pictures of planes and fires. My nieces Sierra said they used to sleep on the floor after my sister passed. Said beds felt too big without her. They looked at each other, really looked. There was a weight they both carried, but in that moment it didn't feel so heavy. Not between them." By early evening, Sierra stood in front of the stove, eyeing a battered skillet like it might bite her. Jack leaned over her shoulder, grinning. "You're doing fine." I added too much pepper. "There's no such thing." "Yes, there is. My mouth still hasn't forgiven me for the last time." Jack laughed. "You're doing something rare, you know. What's that, trusting someone?" Sierra froze the wooden spoon in her hand, hovering over the skillet. "I didn't say I trusted you," she said. "You didn't have to." She turned toward him, face unreadable. "That's dangerous talk. Jack's voice lowered just enough to be steady without being pushy. So is living like nobody's ever going to stay. Sierra held his gaze, and for a long second, neither of them moved. Then one of the girls called out from the living room, and the moment unraveled like a thread pulled too soon. Sierra turned back to the skillet. "Dinner's almost ready." Jack smiled to himself. Smells like victory. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Jack walked past the living room and saw Sierra sitting alone on the couch. She wasn't reading. She wasn't on her phone. She was just sitting, staring at the fire again. He walked in, sat down beside her. "Do you ever stop waiting for the next bad thing?" she asked. Jack thought for a moment. "No. But sometimes something good shows up instead. And if you're lucky, you're paying enough attention to let it stay." Sierra didn't speak, but slowly her hand found its way to the space between them. Jack didn't move, didn't push. He just opened his palm, and she placed hers in it. The next morning, the sky above Willow Creek hung low and heavy, the color of worn steel. Jack stood on the back porch with a mug of coffee in his hand, staring out at the snow-covered pasture beyond the tree line. The quiet was different now. Not empty, just full in a new way. Inside the house, laughter echoed faintly. Ellie, Lila, and Toby were building some kind of cardboard contraption in the living room. The air smelled of maple syrup and pine wood. Jack took a slow breath and let it linger in his chest. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. Sierra stepped out behind him, wrapped in one of Mason's old flannel shirts. It was far too big for her, but it suited her somehow, like she'd always been meant to wear something that once belonged here. "I hope it's okay I borrowed this," she said, tugging at the sleeve. Jack looked over, his voice warm. "It fits." She glanced out toward the trees. "You ever feel like life's letting you borrow peace? Like it's not yours to keep?" Jack took a sip of coffee, considering her words. "Yeah, but sometimes the things we borrow, we end up earning." They stood in comfortable quiet for a beat longer, before Sierra looked at him uncertain. "Would it be all right if I showed you something?" Jack nodded already, knowing what she meant. They sat cross-legged on the floor by the fireplace, the twins still busy in their imaginative world, and Toby quietly drawing nearby. Sierra reached for her backpack and unzipped the inner pocket with a care that bordered on reverence. She pulled out a small bundle bound with faded green twine. Letters, aged, weathered corners curled from time and memory. Some were written on military stationery, others on scrap paper, one even on the back of a ration box lid. She placed them gently between them like sacred offerings. Jack swallowed hard. His hands moved almost unwillingly, as if his body feared what his heart already knew. Sierra spoke softly. "He wrote them during our deployment. Said he didn't want to send them until he was sure he'd come home. But the week before the explosion, he gave them to me. Told me to find you if anything happened. Told me you were the only person who ever believed in him." Jack's eyes stung. "I wasn't always kind to him," he murmured. "I thought pushing him harder would keep him from making the mistakes our dad made." Sierra looked at him. "He never saw it that way. He respected you. He talked about you more than anyone else." Jack gently untied the bundle. The top letter bore his name in Mason's unmistakable handwriting, slanted, precise, always in blue ink. "Jack, I don't know if I'm coming back. Not trying to be dramatic, I just see the way things are going. But if I don't, I need you to know something. You were the one who showed me what a man could be. Not our father. Not the army. You. You raised me more than anyone else did. And I'm sorry I didn't say that out loud before. Tell Toby about me if you think it's right. Let him know his uncle was a knucklehead who loved him even from afar. And if someone brings you this letter, take care of her. She's family too." Jack closed his eyes. The words pressed down on his chest like gravity. It wasn't just the guilt, it was the love. Unspoken for so long, it had waited patiently in the seams of folded paper. He looked up at Sierra. "You carried these for 2 years?" She nodded. "I couldn't just mail them. Didn't feel right." "Why now?" he asked. "Because," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You're ready." The fire crackled. Outside, the snow had started falling again in fine, deliberate flakes. Jack sat motionless for a while, the letters still cradled in his hands. "You know," he said slowly, "there's a memory I have of Mason, when he was maybe 7. He scraped his knee bad falling off his bike. I ran over thinking he'd be howling. But he just looked up at me, eyes full of tears, and said, 'Don't tell Mom. I want to be tough like you.'" Jack let out a soft laugh, pained and fond. I didn't feel tough. I felt like a scared kid raising another scared kid. Sierra smiled gently. "Maybe that's what made you good at it." As twilight approached, the living room dimmed. The twins lay curled up in sleeping bags, exhausted from play. Toby sat on the edge of the couch, drawing quietly. Sierra lit a few candles and joined Jack at the kitchen table. "You still keep in touch with anyone from your unit?" he asked. She shook her head. "After Mason died, I didn't know how to go back. Everything felt different." "You were close." Sierra's eyes flicked to the candle flame. "He looked out for me, more than he had to. Sometimes I think he saw something in me I didn't even see myself." Jack nodded. "He did that for a lot of people. Just never gave himself the same grace." There was a pause. "Do you think he'd be okay with this?" she asked. Jack looked over at her, not quite understanding. "This," she repeated softly. "Me. Here. With you. The kids. After everything." Jack's voice was steady. "I think he brought you here." Sierra blinked hard. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then quietly, Jack reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. He said, "You were family," he added. "And I don't take that lightly." That night, after the house had gone, still, Jack sat alone by the fire again. He reread the first letter, then the second, and then the third. Each one painted a picture of a brother he thought he'd known, but who had grown into someone better, braver and wiser in his absence. One letter ended with a line that echoed in his chest. "If I don't make it home, make home better than it was. That's all I ask." Jack folded the letters, returned them to their ribbon, and placed them in the center drawer of the old writing desk in the hallway. Not to be hidden. To be kept. He looked toward the hallway, toward the sleeping woman, and the children who had filled the silence with laughter. And for the first time since Mason's funeral, Jack Monroe didn't feel like he was living someone else's story. He felt like he was finally beginning his own. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long, amber shadows across the snow-blanketed yard. The light flickered through the bare cottonwoods, warm and golden despite the frigid air. Jack stood on the porch, mug of lukewarm coffee in hand shoulders, wrapped in a thick denim jacket lined with fleece. The air smelled of pine ash and the faint memory of supper. Inside, Sierra helped the kids into pajamas. Lila giggled as Ellie tried to hop on one foot with a sock halfway on, and Toby's laughter followed, soft and delighted, as if even he didn't quite believe it was his own. Jack smiled. He hadn't heard Toby laugh like that in nearly a year. When the screen door creaked open behind him, he didn't need to turn. Sierra stepped outside, her breath fogging in the air. She wore the same oversized flannel shirt, her sleeves rolled up, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets. They stood side by side for a moment, saying nothing. The silence stretched between them, unhurried, but thick with something unspoken. "He had your smile," she said, finally. Jack turned. "Mason." She nodded. Not all the time. but when he laughed for real, it looked like that. Jack looked out over the tree line. He didn't smile much after our mom died. I don't think he ever fully learned how to live without guilt. Sierra nodded slowly. Sometimes the ones who feel the most are the ones least likely to show it. She pulled out a folded paper from her pocket. Jack glanced at it, recognizing the shape before the creases gave it away. Another letter, he asked. She shook her head. No. This one's mine. He looked at her. I wrote it to myself. After Mason died. Never meant to show it to anyone. I'd sit with it some nights. Remind myself I was still here. Jack said nothing. He didn't move, didn't interrupt. His silence was its own kind of permission. Sierra unfolded the page carefully, as if afraid it might tear under the weight of memory. If you're reading this, you survived another day. You carried your weight. You didn't run. You held your post. You did what needed doing. And maybe no one saw. Maybe no one said, "Thank you. But I see you. And that's enough for now. Tomorrow might be harder. But tonight, you made it through. That counts. That counts." Jack exhaled slow and quiet. "You should never have had to write that to yourself," he said. She folded the letter again. There wasn't anyone else. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet acknowledgement of truth. Jack turned to face her fully. "There is now." Sierra looked up at him. The porch light glowed softly behind her, framing her face in gold. Her eyes, always sharp and calculating, seemed to soften just a little. "I don't know how to do this, Jack," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. "But I'd like to try." She searched his face for a long time, as if waiting for the catch, the condition, the hidden agenda. But there was none. Just Jack Monroe, grieving, healing, hopeful, and standing still. She nodded once, and that was enough. Later, they sat inside the fire, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The kids had fallen asleep on a mountain of pillows. Ellie had curled into Sierra's lap before drifting off. Jack handed her a fleece blanket, and she covered the child with the carefulness of someone who'd learned to hold life gently. "I used to think if I stopped moving, I'd fall apart," she said. Jack leaned back in the chair. "I used to think if I let someone in again, I'd lose them too." They shared a quiet moment, both of them staring into the fire, like it might have answers neither could find elsewhere. "But this," she said, "this feels like something I don't have to run from." Jack's eyes lingered on her face. "You don't have to run anymore." The following morning came with a pale winter sun that struggled to break through thick clouds. Jack made French toast, burnt on one side as always, and Sierra brewed strong black coffee like it was a military operation. The house smelled like cinnamon and second chances. Toby set the table. Ellie folded napkins into uneven triangles. Lila counted forks with the precision of a commander leading a mission. Jack paused, looking around the small kitchen. The scene was almost absurd in its normalcy, but to him, it felt like a miracle. That afternoon, while Sierra walked with the kids through the backwoods behind the house, Jack sat at the kitchen table. Mason's letters spread before him. One caught his eye, one he hadn't read yet. It was dated just 3 days before Mason died. He unfolded it with care. "Jack, I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about the boy who raised me when no one else stepped up. I don't know if I ever said it right, but you saved me. Not just once, always. If you're reading this, I probably didn't make it home. I hate that. I hate the pain it'll bring. But I also know you. You'll survive it. You always have. But I don't want you to just survive anymore. I want you to live. If you meet someone who reminds you what that feels like, don't let fear keep you from trying. Don't let the past steal your future. You've carried me far enough. Let someone carry you now. You deserve that. We both do. Mason Jack read it twice, then a third time. By the end, his vision blurred. He folded it carefully, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and stood. Outside, Sierra laughed at something one of the girls said. It was a rare sound, full and unguarded, rising above the brittle trees, like a song meant for spring. And Jack knew. She wasn't just passing through. She was part of the story now. The wind shifted that night. It wasn't the kind of change you could see. There were no broken tree branches or rattling shutters, but Jack felt it in his bones. A subtle thinning in the air, like something was slipping quietly out the back door. He hadn't heard the sound of footsteps, hadn't seen the headlights. But when he walked into the living room at 5:12 a.m., rubbing sleep from his eyes, Sierra was packing. She stood near the front door, her military backpack propped upright, like a silent soldier at attention. The twins were still asleep, curled together on the couch, unaware. The fire had died down to a soft orange glow. Jack froze. Sierra didn't look up. "I figured you'd be up early," she said, adjusting the strap on her pack. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Since last night." He looked at the girls, then back at her. "You weren't going to say goodbye. I was." She gestured to the envelope on the kitchen counter. "In writing." Jack walked over, slowly picked it up. His name was written on the front in neat, deliberate script. He didn't open it. Why, he asked. She finally met his eyes, and for the first time in days, the wall was back. Not the guarded stillness he'd come to respect, but the hard, mission-ready blankness of a soldier about to disappear. "I stayed longer than I should have," she said. "The girls need stability, structure, not borrowed kindness." "You think this is borrowed?" Sierra didn't answer. "You think I let you in just to watch you go? I think I'm not good at staying. And I won't risk them getting attached to something that isn't real." Jack took a breath, counted to 5, then exhaled. "You're scared. I'm responsible. You're both," he said. "But that doesn't make you right." She turned away, fiddling with the zipper on her coat. Jack walked over to her, standing just a few feet away. Not touching, just close enough that his voice wouldn't wake the kids. "You carried 12 letters for 2 years, Sierra. Crossed state lines. Slept in shelters. Took part-time jobs no one respected. You honored a man you didn't have to. You raised 2 kids who weren't yours because you couldn't bear to break a promise. And now, you're running? From what? From someone who wants to carry the weight with you?" Her chin trembled slightly. "I'm not someone people stay for, Jack." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "You don't get to decide that. Not alone. Not anymore." There was a silence then, thick, painful, fragile. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears. He didn't know what he expected her to say. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Then from behind them a small voice broke the air like a pebble dropped into still water. "Are we leaving again?" Ellie stood in the doorway, her hair tangled, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her voice was groggy, uncertain. Sierra turned slowly. Her breath caught in her throat. Lila was awake now, too, sitting up with wide eyes. Toby hovered behind them, rubbing one eye with the back of his hand, his expression confused and half hurt. Sierra knelt. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "Not anymore." Later that morning, after the sun had broken through the clouds and spilled gold across the frosted trees, Jack stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. Again. Sierra sat at the table sipping coffee. This time she didn't flinch when their knees brushed beneath the table. The girls colored quietly in the corner, while Toby explained his spaceship drawing to them with the authority of a NASA scientist. "You didn't open the letter," she said. Jack flipped another pancake. "Didn't need to." You sure he turned to her? If it said goodbye, I wouldn't believe it. If it said thank you, it's already been said. And if it said sorry, you've done nothing to be sorry for. Sierra didn't respond for a while. Then she folded her arms on the table, rested her chin on them, and murmured, "You're really not going to make this easy, are you?" "Nope." She smiled, just barely. But it was real. That afternoon, Jack found her on the back porch alone. The sky had softened, clouds retreating behind the ridge. She sat in the same spot where she'd read her letter aloud just days earlier. He sat down beside her. "I keep thinking about what Mason wrote," she said, "about letting someone carry me for a change." Jack nodded. "I've spent years trying to prove I didn't need anyone." "You succeeded," he said. "But it cost you." She looked at him. "Are you offering to fix me?" "No," he said gently. "I'm offering to stand with you. That's all." A silence passed between them. Not tense, not painful, just full. Full of all the things still being learned. Full of the quiet miracle that people like them, people who had given up on belonging, were still capable of finding home. That night, as the stars came out over the snow-covered field, and the last embers of the fireplace crackled low, Jack laid Mason's final letter on the mantel, not to forget, but to honor. He looked at Sierra curled on the couch with Ellie tucked under one arm, Lila asleep on her lap. Toby sat beside her, leaning slightly into her side. And Jack smiled. Because sometimes the hardest choice wasn't staying or leaving. It was believing that this warmth, this unlikely belonging could actually be yours. The knock on the front door came just after breakfast. 3 slow taps, spaced evenly, neither urgent nor casual. Jack looked up from the sink where he was rinsing the kids' cereal bowls. Sierra froze mid-sentence at the table, instinctively reaching for Lila's hand. Even Toby stopped tying his boots. Knocks like that didn't come often in Willow Creek. And never, at 8:15 a.m., Jack wiped his hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Standing on the porch was an elderly man with sharp eyes and a cane carved from gnarled maple wood. He wore a heavy brown coat, the collar turned up against the wind, and a knit cap pulled low on his forehead. His beard was white-trimmed but full, and his posture, despite the cane, was unmistakably military. Jack's instinctive wariness melted the moment the man spoke. "You, Jack Monroe?" His voice was rough like gravel but steady. "Yes, sir," Jack replied. "Can I help you?" The man gave a slight nod. "Name's Walter Finch. You don't know me, but I knew your brother." Inside the house shifted into quiet reverence. Walter sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace, cradling a cup of hot coffee with both hands. Sierra sat across from him, back straight, lips pressed in a thin line. Jack leaned against the archway to the kitchen, arms folded, eyes unreadable. "I served with Mason in his last deployment," Walter said, pausing before each sentence, as if each word deserved space to breathe. "I was the old man in the unit. They used to call me Gramps. Not behind my back, right to my face." Jack allowed a ghost of a smile. "He never talked much about himself," Walter continued, "but he talked about you, and about her." He nodded toward Sierra. Sierra didn't flinch. "He saved my life," she said quietly. Walter looked at her eyes sharp beneath white brows. "And you honored him more than most ever could." He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a folded page, crisp, white, official-looking. "This is why I came," he said, handing it to Jack. Jack unfolded it. It was a letter from the Veterans Legacy Foundation, signed and notarized, outlining a full housing grant and educational assistance package for dependents of fallen service members, applied for on behalf of Sierra Maddox and the 2 girls she now cared for. Jack blinked. "You did this?" Walter nodded. Mason and I had a pact. If one of us didn't make it, the other would look after whoever was left behind. Took me longer than I wanted to find her, but a friend forwarded a blog post. Your name was in it. A local story about a vet and 3 kids being taken in during a snowstorm. I knew right away it had to be you. Jack glanced at Sierra, who was staring at Walter, like she couldn't quite believe he was real. I thought the system had forgotten us, she said. Walter let out a quiet chuckle. Oh, it tried. But some of us don't forget promises. They spent the next hour poring over the details, benefits, deadlines, next steps. Sierra listened silently, her fingers tight around her coffee cup. Her jaw clenched. Jack noticed how she kept blinking like she was trying to keep something behind her eyes from spilling out. When Walter finally stood to leave, Jack walked him out onto the porch. You didn't have to do all this, Jack said. Walter looked out at the trees. No, I wanted to. He tapped the porch railing lightly with his cane. Mason was a good man. But more than that, he was trying to be better. That matters more than most people realize. Jack nodded, his voice softer. He didn't think he deserved anything good. Walter looked him square in the eyes. None of us think we do. But that doesn't mean we don't. Inside, Sierra was still seated, the paperwork spread out on the table in front of her, like a map to somewhere she never thought she'd go. Jack returned, took the chair beside her. You okay? She nodded slowly. I'm just not used to things working out. Maybe it's time you got used to it. She gave a soft laugh, the kind that sounded like someone testing the idea of hope. You realize what this means? She asked. A house. School for the girls. I could actually build something stable. You are building something stable, Jack said. You just needed someone to lay the foundation with. That evening, Sierra sat outside on the back steps wrapped in a blanket. The kids were inside with Toby, drawing rockets and stick figures, and houses with too many windows. Jack joined her with 2 mugs of cocoa and sat beside her without speaking. You think Mason knew? She asked after a while. Knew what? That this would happen? That you and I? Jack thought for a long time before answering. I think he hoped. But more than that, I think he trusted both of us enough to make something beautiful out of something broken. Sierra didn't respond. She just leaned her head on his shoulder. Jack let his cheek rest against her hair. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a fog. It felt like a road, still winding, still uncertain, but no longer walked alone. That night, as the fire dimmed and the kids drifted to sleep, Sierra opened her phone and stared at a blank email draft. To Veterans Legacy Foundation, subject, thank you. She began to type, but stopped. Words felt too small. So instead, she stood, walked to the hallway desk, pulled out a piece of Mason's letter paper, and began to write by hand. Not to the foundation. Not to Walter. But to Mason. You kept your promise. You brought me home. In the most unexpected way. You taught me how to fight. But now, I'm learning how to stay. That might be the hardest lesson of all. I hope I make you proud. Tell our ghosts that we're okay now. Love, Sierra. She folded the letter and placed it next to the bundle Jack had left on the mantel. And as she turned off the lights, she didn't feel the usual ache of endings, only the warmth of a beginning. Willow Creek was the kind of town that noticed things. It noticed when someone painted their shutters a new shade of blue. It noticed when the grocery store started carrying a different brand of pickles. And it certainly noticed when a single dad, quiet, widowed, consistent as sunrise, suddenly had a beautiful woman and 2 little girls staying at his place through a blizzard. But to its credit, Willow Creek was not the kind of town that judged quickly. It was the kind of town that waited sometimes, with skepticism, sometimes with curiosity, but always with a memory long enough to remember who had shown up when it counted. And so when Jack and Sierra brought Ellie, Lila, and Toby into the general store one frosty morning, 3 children giggling over gumdrops and hot chocolate packets, Mrs. Grady behind the counter offered something unexpected, a smile. "You must be Sierra," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Jack's told us nothing about you, which around here means you might actually be important." Sierra blinked. Thank you." Mrs. Grady leaned in, voice softening. "It's good to see him laugh again." Sierra glanced over at Jack, who was kneeling beside the kids, helping Lila choose between marshmallows and whipped cream. His face was lit by something quiet, but unmistakable. "He's..." Something Sierra said. Mrs. Grady nodded. "He always has been. Just needed someone to remind him." By week's end, word had spread. And not just about Sierra. The community center offered after-school tutoring for Ellie, and Lila no registration required. The bakery left a brown paper bag of cinnamon rolls on Jack's porch with a note. "For the mornings that come too early." A man Jack barely knew from the feed store dropped off a stack of firewood just in case the cold snaps again. At first, Sierra didn't know what to make of it. She wasn't used to being seen, not without expectations, not without strings. But no one asked for anything in return. No one questioned why she was there, why she had 2 kids that weren't biologically hers, or why she walked with a slight limp some mornings. Instead, people waved. They offered directions. They asked about the girls' favorite books. It was in its own way a quiet miracle. One afternoon, Jack found Sierra sitting on the floor of Toby's room surrounded by art supplies. Ellie was painting a paper sun. Lila was drawing a stick figure family with far too many dogs. Toby, focused as ever, was creating an elaborate rocket ship with construction paper thrusters. Sierra had red paint on her cheek, and a look in her eyes Jack hadn't seen before. "Peace." "You need anything?" he asked from the doorway. She looked up, smiling. "I have everything I need." Jack didn't reply. He just watched her, something tender stirring deep in his chest. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, the 2 of them sat on the porch steps with mugs of tea, watching the stars blink slowly into view above the pines. "It's strange," Sierra said. "What is I've been in combat zones with less tension than my own mind. But this place, this house, it's like the noise is finally quiet." Jack took a sip of tea, his voice low. "Sometimes stillness is the hardest thing to trust." Sierra nodded. "Especially when you've lived so long bracing for the next explosion." They sat for a while, neither rushing the silence. Then Sierra added, "I didn't think people like me got homes like this. Or second chances. Or..." Jackman rose. Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable at first. Then he reached over and took her hand, not with urgency but with something that felt deeply intentional. "You didn't get this, Sierra. You built it." The next morning, a letter arrived in the mailbox. Handwritten. Elegant script. A return address from the edge of town. Sierra read it at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly. "Dear Miss Maddox, I lost my son in Iraq in 2006. For a long time I believed his death was meaningless. But yesterday I saw you walking those little girls to school, head high, hair loose, letting the sun fall on your face like someone who survived. I saw my son in you, not in uniform, but in spirit. Thank you for reminding me that some sacrifices aren't lost. They just bloom somewhere else. Welcome to Willow Creek, Agnes Whitmore." Sierra folded the letter slowly, eyes shining. Jack read the look on her face and said nothing. He just placed a hand on her back, steady and warm. That Sunday, they walked into the tiny white church on Main Street, Jack in his only clean button-down Sierra and a soft blue sweater Ellie had picked out. The girls held hands as they skipped ahead. Toby walked just behind, carrying a folded drawing like it was sacred scripture. The pews were full of familiar faces, faces that had watched Jack raise a son alone, faces that had seen Sierra walk into town with frost on her boots and fire in her eyes. As they slid into a pew, Reverend Harris smiled from the pulpit. "We've got some new old souls with us today," he said gently. "And I think that's reason enough to believe we're still in the business of grace." Sierra didn't cry, but her hand found Jack's and didn't let go. That night, under a sky full of stars, Sierra opened her journal and wrote just 3 words: "I'm home." The first real snow after the storm came soft and thick, covering the yard like a clean slate. It wasn't the kind of snow that howled against windows or clogged back roads. This was gentler, heavy enough to stick light enough to play in. The kind of snow children remembered, and adults secretly hoped for, even if they complained about shoveling. Jack stood at the kitchen window, cradling a mug of coffee, watching 3 tiny figures wobble across the backyard in mismatched mittens and lopsided boots. Toby led the charge, his red scarf flapping behind him like a superhero's cape. Ellie and Lila trudged behind arms full of carrots, old buttons, and 1 dented metal pot for a snowman's hat. Outside, Sierra laughed, a rich, full sound that turned Jack's insides to something warm and unnameable. She knelt in the snow beside the kids, her cheeks, pink eyes bright. She'd never looked more alive, and Jack had never felt more certain. It took nearly an hour of rolling snowpacking, collapsing, and starting over, but eventually, the 5 of them stood in front of a slightly lopsided snowman with a crooked grin and twigs for arms that looked like he was shrugging in defeat. "He needs a name," Ellie declared. Captain Frostbite Toby said solemnly. Sierra smirked. "General Snow? Mr. Wiggleface!" Lila shouted, earning a round of laughter. "Whatever we call him, Jack said he's probably going to fall over by morning." "Just like real generals," Sierra muttered under her breath. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, let's get inside before someone loses a toe." They trudged back to the house, boots, stomping noses, red gloves soaked. Jack helped the kids peel off their outer layers, while Sierra placed mugs of hot cocoa on the table, careful not to burn tiny tongues. Later, when the kids were busy building pillow forts and drawing comic books, Jack found Sierra sitting near the fireplace, rubbing warmth back into her fingers. "You haven't stopped moving since sunrise," he said, handing her a thick pair of socks. "Neither have you. I'm not the one who decided to engage in snow warfare before breakfast." She grinned, pulling the socks over her frozen toes. They needed something to remember. Something good. They will. She looked up at him, her smile softening. "So will I." Jack sat beside her. Close, but not too close. "You really didn't think you'd ever have this again?" he asked. "I didn't think I deserved it." He turned toward her. "Why not?" Sierra hesitated, then looked into the fire. "When you've seen what I've seen, when you've done things you don't talk about, it starts to feel like happiness is for other people, like you're only allowed to witness it from the outside." Jack nodded slowly, and now she looked at him, eyes steady. "Now I'm starting to think. Maybe some things don't have to be earned." Jack was quiet for a moment, watching the way the flames reflected in her eyes. "Tell me something true," he said. Sierra tilted her head. "What do you mean, something real? Something you haven't said out loud yet?" She didn't answer right away. Her jaw flexed, her hands curled in her lap. Then softly she whispered, "I'm scared of being happy. Because the last time I was, it disappeared." Jack took her hand gently, deliberately. "Then let's not rush it. Let's just sit here and be whatever this is. No promises. No timelines. She looked at him, breath-catching. But if I kiss you, he added, it won't be out of pity. Or loneliness. Or borrowed emotion. It'll be because I want to. Because you make the silence feel less heavy. Because when I see you laugh with those kids, I feel like I'm watching a sunrise in the middle of winter. Sierra didn't speak. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not urgent or cinematic. No sweeping music, no perfectly timed thunderclap. Just a quiet press of lips, wary, unsure, but full of intent. It lingered, deepened, broke apart like breath in cold air. When they pulled back, neither moved. Their foreheads touched. The only sound was the distant giggle of children. "You okay?" he whispered. She nodded. Then, with a trembling smile, she said, "Yeah. I'm still here." That night, the kids camped out in the living room under a fortress of blankets and string lights. Jack made popcorn on the stovetop, burning the first batch, and Sierra sat on the floor, reading aloud from Charlotte's Web, her voice gentle, occasionally faltering when she reached a line that struck too close. By the time she finished the chapter, the twins were asleep, heads resting on either side of Toby, like puzzle pieces that finally fit. Jack watched them, arms folded, something reverent in his posture. "Looks like a family," he murmured. Sierra turned to him. "It is a family." He nodded. "But it still feels like a dream," he admitted. She stood, walked over to him, and placed a hand on his chest, right over the pocket where Mason's final letter still lived. "Then maybe this is the part," she said, "where you finally let yourself wake up and realize the dream came true." Outside, the snowman leaned a little farther to one side, as if bowing in surrender to the warmth that had taken hold inside the little house. But no one noticed. They were too busy building something that didn't melt. The snow had stopped sometime in the early morning, leaving behind a landscape so still, so clean, it looked as if the entire world had paused to breathe. Sierra stood by the kitchen window, cradling a cup of tea between her palms. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned, not empty. The kids were still asleep, curled in warm piles of blankets, after a night of flashlight stories and whispered giggles. Jack had gone into town for groceries and coffee beans, promising to bring back cinnamon rolls if Mrs. Grady had made any. Sierra could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the soft crackle of embers in the fireplace. It had taken her weeks to stop bracing for silence to turn into loneliness. But it never did. She reached for her backpack, the same worn military-issue bag she had carried across state lines, through shelters and snowy highways, and unzipped the front pocket. Inside, wrapped in an old bandana, was the folded letter, the one she had written to herself in the back of a supply truck on her last night in Syria. She hadn't opened it in over a year. She carried it like a talisman, not because it gave her strength, but because it reminded her what it had taken to survive. She unfolded it now, slowly, her fingers brushing the creases with something like reverence. Then, as the sun filtered through the frosted window panes, she began to read. Out loud. To no one and to everyone. Dear me, if you're still here, it means you kept breathing. It means you didn't let the ghosts pull you under. You don't feel brave. You don't feel strong. You feel hollow and tired and worn to the bone. But you're still here. And that counts. You don't know if you'll ever feel whole again. You don't know if there's a place where you belong. But keep going anyway. One day, maybe you'll wake up in a house that smells like cinnamon and hear the sound of children laughing. One day, maybe someone will take your hand, not because you're broken, but because you're enough. And if that day comes, stay. Please stay. With love, the version of you who still believes in light. Sierra's voice broke on the last line, She folded the letter back with care and placed it on the table. She didn't wipe the tears that slid down her cheeks. She let them fall warm and quiet. A soft knock on the doorframe pulled her back to the moment. Jack stood there holding a brown paper bag and 2 steaming cups from the coffee shop. His face changed when he saw hers concern first, then something gentler. Not alarmed, just present. She sniffed, smiled through the blur. "You got the cinnamon rolls." He held up the bag, with extra icing. Sierra laughed, wiping her sleeve across her cheek. "You really know how to fix a morning." He walked in, set the bag down, and pulled out a chair beside her. "I read it," she said, gesturing to the folded page. Jack didn't ask what it said. He didn't have to. Instead, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "How did it feel?" he asked. "Like I was telling the girl I used to be that she made it." Jack nodded. "She'd be proud of you." Sierra looked down at their hands, fingers intertwined like roots. "I think I'm finally proud of her, too." Later that day, the girls made welcome home signs with markers and glitter glue. No one had told them to. They just did it the way children often know things without explanation. Toby helped, of course, measuring the paper edges with a ruler like it was a military blueprint. Jack fixed a loose doorknob. Sierra baked cookies from a box mix that somehow turned out perfect. It wasn't a holiday. Wasn't anyone's birthday. It was just a Tuesday. But it felt like something. In the late afternoon, Sierra and Jack stood outside watching the kids roll down the snowy hill behind the house. Laughter echoed between the trees. "I don't think I've ever been this happy on a Tuesday," Jack said. Sierra tucked her hands into her coat. Or this, still. Jack turned to her. "I've been thinking about something." "Uh-oh," he grinned. "I want to build a bench out here, right at the top of that hill." Sierra raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "So we can sit," he said. "Watch them grow up, drink bad coffee, argue about dog names, whatever comes next." She looked at him for a long moment, the cold wind brushing her hair across her face. "You're making a plan," she said, like it was both a joke and a vow. "Guess I am." Sierra smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes. "I like that plan." That night, before bed, Sierra slipped the letter back into her backpack, but not to hide it. She placed it inside a small wooden box Jack had carved for her, along with a photo of her sister, a dog tag she no longer wore, and the crayon drawing Ellie had made of our new family. These weren't artifacts of loss anymore. They were proof of becoming. Before turning off the lights, Jack leaned against the doorway of the bedroom, watching her settle under the covers. The kids were already asleep. The fire was dying down. The snow outside glowed in moonlight. "You good?" he asked. Sierra pulled the quilt up to her chest, nodded. "Better than good." Jack walked over, bent down, and kissed her forehead. She caught his hand before he turned away. "I meant what I read this morning," she said. "About staying." Jack smiled. "Then we'll keep building. One Tuesday at a time." The snow returned the night before Christmas. Not the harsh kind that cut through skin and halted everything, but soft, deliberate flakes that drifted like wishes, landing gently on rooftops, tree branches, and the bundled-up shoulders of people who had been waiting, whether they knew it or not. Willow Creek lit up like a postcard, twinkling lights wrapped around porch railings, wreaths on every door, candles flickering behind frosted windows. Even the old church bell, long silent, rang once at sundown. Not loud, just enough to be heard. Inside the Monroe home, the fire crackled. The scent of cinnamon and pine and melted sugar cookies hung in the air. Paper snowflakes taped to windows fluttered each time someone passed. Stockings, hand-stitched by Mrs. Grady, now bore 5 names, one for each soul who now called this place home. Sierra stood near the mantel, adjusting Lila's tiny handmade ornament for the third time. Jack watched her from the couch, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. She was humming absent-mindedly but sweetly, as if the melody had always been hers, and she'd just remembered it again. "You keep moving that ornament," Jack said, teasing. "It's crooked." "No, it's not." "Maybe I'm crooked," she said with a smirk. Jack stood across the room and gently turned her toward him. "You're perfect." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a shriek of delight cut through the house. "It's snowing again," Ellie shouted from the hallway. "Christmas snow." Toby appeared behind her, more composed but grinning. "We should check if the snowman's still standing." Lila came skipping in, already in boots. "Can we give him a candy cane nose now?" Jack and Sierra exchanged a look. Jack laughed. 5 more minutes and we'll all head out." 15, Toby corrected. "We're on a schedule." Outside, bundled in layers and glowing with laughter, the children rushed toward the small hill. The snowman from last week, rebuilt twice, already still stood, though now leaning slightly more westward. They added new twigs for arms, replaced his lopsided eyes, and finally gave him a candy cane for a nose. Jack and Sierra stood hand in hand at the top of the hill, watching. "This was always my favorite time of year," she said. "Before the war. Before everything." "What changed it?" Sierra was quiet for a moment. Then softly, the silence after. Jack squeezed her hand. "You brought the sound back." She turned to him, tears threatening but not falling. "So did you." Later that evening, they gathered around the tree. The living room was glowing with candlelight and firelight, casting long shadows and soft halos. Ellie and Lila sat cross-legged in their pajamas, ripping into carefully wrapped presents. Toby handed out gifts, with the precision of a field commander, each one labeled in perfect block lettering. Sierra opened a small box from Jack. Inside was a simple silver chain with a pendant in the shape of a pine tree. "For roots," he said quietly. She looked at him. "And for staying," Jack nodded. "For staying." She leaned in and kissed him. Soft, grateful, certain. When it was Jack's turn, Sierra handed him a large, flat envelope. His name was written in her handwriting, strong and even, but with a small curl on the J that hadn't been there before. Inside was a framed letter. Mason's last letter. Typed out, printed on archival paper framed in oak. "If I don't make it home, make home better than it was. That's all I ask." Beneath the words, Sierra had added in a different font one line of her own. "He did Mason. And now so have I." Jack's throat tightened. He didn't say, "Thank you." He just wrapped his arms around her and held on. Around 10 p.m., with the kids finally asleep, Sierra and Jack sat in the quiet glow of the fire. They didn't need words, just the crackle of logs, the occasional creak of the old floorboards, and the soft snowfall outside. Jack rose and returned with a small wooden box. "I found something in the garage a few weeks ago," he said. Inside was a weathered cassette tape labeled in fading ink, "Christmas 1992, Mason's Solo." He set it into an old tape player, turned the volume just loud enough to catch the static. Then a boy's voice, barely 12 years old, singing a slightly off-key version of "O Holy Night." The room filled with the trembling sound of childhood, earnest, brave, imperfect, unforgettable. Sierra covered her mouth. Jack's eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. When the song ended, the recording kept going. Mason laughing in the background, their mother's voice faintly scolding someone, then silence. "That's the only recording of him I have," Jack said. "I'm glad you shared it," she whispered. Jack looked around the room, the tree, the stockings, the letters and drawings taped to the fridge, the boots by the door, the sleeping children upstairs. "I think this is the life he wanted me to have." Sierra nodded. I think this is the life he helped create. Before they went to bed, Sierra slipped outside one last time, walking barefoot onto the porch, despite the cold. She stood still for a long moment, face turned up to the stars. She whispered something no one heard, but Jack, watching from the window, knew. She was thanking the ghost of a brother, a sister, a younger self, not for what had been lost, but for what had finally been found. And so it was that Christmas night in a small Wyoming town, where miracles came quiet and slow, 5 hearts once broken, once scattered, beat in rhythm beneath one roof. No headlines, no grand pronouncements, just a soldier who stayed, a man who forgave, a boy who laughed again, 2 girls who believed in snowmen and candy cane noses, and the memory of someone who never made it home, but somehow led them all there anyway. If this story touched your heart even just a little, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop a comment below your words. Help us feel a little more connected, no matter how far apart we may be. And if stories like this bring you comfort, hope, or simply a quiet moment of reflection, consider subscribing to the channel. It means more than you know, and helps us keep sharing these gentle reminders that love, kindness, and second chances are still out there. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. From our little corner of the world to yours, stay warm, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story.